$70,000. That's what it costs for the privilege of owning the top of the line Toyota 4Runner, which puts it in some pretty stiff competition. So is it worth it?
A few months ago, I reviewed the cheapest Toyota 4Runner you can buy, and now we have the most expensive. This one, optioned out to $69,598 with destination, is getting well into Land Rover Defender territory. Today we're going to walk through all the features the Trailhunter has, test whether or not it's good for outdoor activities by trying to stuff a bike in the back, and then finally I'm going to take it for a drive and give you my opinion on whether or not it's worth the money they're asking compared to the competition.
The Trailhunter model is all new for Tacoma and 4Runner. And what is it compared to something like the TRD Pro, which was the previous king of the model range? Well, where the TRD Pro is more of a Baja blast through the desert, this is more slow rock crawl through overlanding adventures. It has some different bits. While a lot of this stuff is the same, like of course skid plates, a rear locking differential, disconnecting sway bar, the difference are things like this snorkel on the side here, which actually sounds insane, as you'll see on the drive, a roof rack, which would support something like your rooftop tent for your camping, and even an onboard air compressor in the back of this 4Runner Trailhunter. Besides that, the TRD Pro and this are going to look very similar in terms of the dimensions. This one has gold wheels, which is certainly a big differentiator looks-wise, and also is seen here in the Everest color. This is a lovely green, and I'd love to know what you think about the looks of the new Trailhunter in the comments below. In 2025, there are so many different ways to make horsepower. You can have large displacement, you can have forced induction, you can even use electricity, and Toyota's decided to use a couple of those latter options. This is a 2.4 liter turbocharged engine paired with a hybrid setup. So we're using forced induction and electricity to achieve 326 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. Of course, the horsepower number is nothing to write home about, but they are all about torque with this vehicle. It is paired with a part-time four-wheel drive system, as you would imagine, a 2-speed transfer case that is electronically controlled, and an 8-speed automatic transmission. Now, with hybrids, you traditionally think of good fuel economy, right? Well, Toyota claims this is more of a performance hybrid than a fuel economy hybrid, but that said, their EPA numbers are pretty decent for this class of vehicle at 23 city, 24 highway, although just like that TRD Pro I had last week, I'm not getting anywhere near close to those numbers. The interior is definitely a high point for the 4Runner when you consider the competition, things like the Wrangler, the Bronco, even the Defender. All of these have really interesting designs inside, but I think the part that stands out with the 4Runner is the fact that this is feeling towards the upper echelon of being well built in that category. Once again, they all have really interesting and different design touches, but this feels some of the best screwed together of that bunch that I mentioned, and just the use of materials, the quality of the build is just feeling more kind of Land Rover than it feels Bronco or even Wrangler. Those other two kind of fit at the bottom of that pile. And what's great too is you're not losing out on usability in here. You still get everything that Toyota is good at, which is physical HVAC controls, heated and cool seats operated with just a button. It's just hassle-free, as is the infotainment, which is probably the most straightforward infotainment of the bunch. I really enjoy it. It also gets things like wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which is something that, of course, you'll be using most of the time. But the fact that you just get in here and you go, it's no fuss, is really quite enjoyable. And, of course, it has a ton of other added features that you would expect for a very lofty price tag. This gets JBL sound system, which sounds pretty decent. And, of course, the speaker that comes out in the front, you know, a bit of a gimmick, but also kind of cool. And things like a good camera system to be able to see off-road. With this view button here, you can pull up the camera system and get a bunch of different angles, which is certainly helpful. A rear locking differential and a disconnecting sway bar, which will allow for a little more articulation with the suspension. While this is not the most capable off-road of all those models that I mentioned earlier, it is still quite capable and going to be more than enough for what most people are doing. Now, before we kind of wrap up the interior, we certainly need to talk about seating. I do find these front seats incredibly comfortable. They have a nice design too with the yellow stitching, and they're gray, which I think is great for specifically where we are in the summertime. It doesn't absorb heat like black seats, and just offers a nice contrast as well. Now, the back seats are quite interesting. While probably on par for the rest of the vehicles in the class, they don't offer anything too crazy there. It's interesting when you compare this to the Tacoma, because some people do cross-shop the 4Runner and Tacoma. While these vehicles are on the same platform and are very similar in many ways, the back seat is far superior in this 4Runner than it is the Tacoma. You have significantly more leg room, so I can actually sit behind myself in this, and that's something I can't do in the Tacoma, as well as you can actually recline the rear seats in this 4Runner, and that's something you can't do in the Tacoma. So if you are somebody who is kind of looking at being a Toyota buyer, but you're not sure which one, that's definitely something to keep in mind if you actually plan to put adults back there. Before we take this thing for a ride, let's try and throw a bike in the back to see how much space there is in the rear.
If you didn't see my last 4Runner video, you should know the rear floor of the 4Runner is affected by whether or not you're driving a hybrid version. On the left here is a hybrid variant, and as you can see, the battery pack in the back does make the floor higher, which means you lose out on some cargo capacity. Despite that, I can still fit my extra large frame mountain bike in the back with no issues. The floor is not completely flat with the middle row seats down, but it does still offer a massive amount of room for all your hobbies. As always, if you enjoyed the bike test and the rest of this video, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button and leaving a comment below so you don't miss future videos.
Out here for a drive in the 4Runner, and I just got out of an off-road trail and I recorded a video and I was like, yeah, this is interesting. It's the Trailhunter. You want to know what it's like off-road, but you know what is so boring? Watching someone drive at like 5 miles an hour off-road. That is frankly just so boring. So we're going to give you a little better sunset view here in the Rockies, and we'll talk about how it is off-road. I want to compare it to some of its competition, like the Wrangler, like the Bronco, but I also want to talk about how this compares to the TRD Pro 4Runner, because in a way it's kind of competing with itself. When you're paying that much money, they're both kind of the same money. So which do I like better, and which do I think is better? So what this does really well, especially when you're comparing it to things like the Wrangler and Bronco, is be significantly more refined in just about every way compared to those vehicles. Those vehicles, because you can take the doors off, because the roof comes off, they're just not that refined. There's so much wind noise, there's so much road noise. You don't have that here. This is a super well insulated vehicle. And you know what as well, because those make more compromises to be better off-road, they are compromised on-road. This doesn't have any of those compromises. Like, the steering feels great like any other normal vehicle compared to a Bronco or Wrangler, specifically a Wrangler that has just god-awful, like, primitive steering that's more robust for off-road, but just sucks on the road, specifically on the highway. The Bronco gets better, but this is even better than the Bronco. It just drives like a normal car. And I think that's one of the reasons that people buy 4Runners compared to those other vehicles, because they do feel more refined and more normal. Specifically, when you're up here, now I'm going pretty slow, but if you're up here on a windy road going more briskly, it does handle really well. Yeah, there's a lot of body lean. It's a soft off-road vehicle, but it's significantly better than those other off-roaders that we mentioned. Not quite as good as the Defender, of course, and we'll talk about that. But the suspension here is the other highlight that I really love about this, regardless of who we're comparing it against. This is more softly set up than the TRD Pro that I drove. So if you're spending this much money, I like how this drives on-road. I like how it drives off-road because it is more compliant. Sure, if you're jumping it, get the TRD Pro. That's the whole point. But really, you're compromising the rest of this soft suspension by getting the TRD Pro when you could just have this. Like, this rides so much better everywhere, and I would prefer this over the TRD Pro. This Old Man Emu suspension is great. There's still plenty of body control, but it's soft. It just soaks up bumps. And in fact, the off-roading that I was just doing, I didn't even bother to air down because it was just soft enough and compliant enough. Now, what we do need to talk about is this engine, because that is sort of the big point of contention, this hybrid powertrain. And I'll just put my foot down here. It motivates the car pretty well. I mean, 326 horsepower sounds about right. The torque figure makes it seem that it should be faster, but horsepower ultimately is what this feels like. It moves the car plenty quick enough. Definitely as quick or quicker than most of the other competition, unless you're getting into the V6s and the turbo V6s. And that is a knock against this because it doesn't sound as good as those turbo V6s. It doesn't make as much horsepower as those. And you know what? It doesn't make a good sound, except for the fact that how ridiculous is that snorkel? It is insane how loud that is when the windows are down. If you get annoyed with it, you have to put the windows up. You can't rock this car with the windows down if you're trying to have a conversation with your passenger, because it is so loud. So much turbo noise, all that stuff. It's pretty cool. Look, the other options in this class also offer that. So I can't say that's specific because the Bronco has that as well, of course, with all the turbo, and as does the Wrangler. So, hey, that is a cool party trick of the Trailhunter, though, compared to the TRD Pro, which does not have that. So, getting back to the engine, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it makes adequate power, but I just don't know if it's worth the hybrid complexity. You do get a bit of a boost off-road, which I do like, and it is a little bit of an advantage because you basically, like when you're slow rock calling and you're in the 4-cylinder versions of those Jeeps or the Broncos, you kind of really have to put your foot down and wait for the engine to kind of spool up to move. There is a little bit of an advantage with this electric motor because you're getting that instant electric torque. So in that very specific setting, it is a little better. But look, fuel economy wise, 17.5 miles to the gallon, it's not like I'm getting significantly better fuel economy than those other options. So I don't know if it's worth the complexity. And I guess end of the day, I don't know if it feels appropriate for the $70,000 price tag. The rest of these vehicles at that price tag are getting, turbo V6s like the Defender, like the Bronco. Of course, you could even get a V8 with the Wrangler if you spend more. So the powertrain is a bit of a letdown. It's okay. It's fine. And you know what? It makes more power, and certainly up here in the mountains compared to the last generation naturally aspirated V6. So as we kind of sum this up, the things that you should know are, if you're mostly driving on-road with occasional off-road, this is a better option than the Bronco and Wrangler. It's more refined. But the question is, if that is the case and you're not doing hardcore off-roading, can you get away with a lower tier model than this? Because then you're going to save a lot of money. Look, I think this is a really cool model, and money no object, yeah, like this is the coolest 4Runner you can get. It looks awesome. It can go so many places. But man, that base 4Runner I drove was pretty good, and it's most of the way here. Yeah, you don't get like all the crazy off-road bits, but depending on how much you're doing really dictates to me, is it worth that extra cost? So if you want something more refined, you do occasional off-roading, I think this is a better option than the Bronco and Wrangler, assuming you don't want to take the doors off. That's a whole other question. More serious off-roading, Bronco, Wrangler. But the X factor here is the Defender. It's $70,000. You are like into Defender category, and I just prefer the Defender. It rides even better than this. You can get an air suspension, which handles and rides better than this. I think that looks better. I think that is more refined than this. Even, that's like up here in terms of this off-road class. So tough ask at $70,000. Here's the caveat. If you're coming from a previous generation 4Runner, you're gonna love this because it's just better than all those cars in every way. This interior is fantastic. It works really well. The ride is fantastic with the Old Man Emu. You do get more power, specifically up here at altitude, than that previous gen, even if you don't have the V6 noises. So this is a complicated scenario, and it just depends what frame of reference you're coming from and what your intended objectives are. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about the 4Runner Trailhunter in the comments below. If you made it this far, consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and also follow me on Instagram. I post reels in between videos of kind of behind the scenes type stuff. So thanks for coming with me on this one. Great vehicle if you can stomach the price. That's ultimately the TLDR. We'll see you on the next one, guys. Peace.